Hey, everybody. Today I have for you podcast number 34. Today's podcast is titled, My Helpers Ditched Me. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. I'm Dr. Pete Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network, where we flesh out all the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you deserve. And tonight's podcast is going to be a fun one. I'm going to reflect back on some things from the past. And I just want to take a moment, though, to thank all of you for listening. And thank you for also sharing this with other listeners out there, friends, family, coworkers, whoever. But also be sure if you're watching or listening on any of these other platforms to hit the subscribe button. That always helps as well. And if you want to leave any comments or, reviews, whatever, always helps the algorithm to get this out to more people. So appreciate that. Tonight's podcast, number 34, My Helpers Ditched Me. And this is a story that I told and I wrote about in a blog a while ago, several years ago. I can't remember what year it was, but here's what happened. I had a project planned for the weekend, and I needed at least one and possibly two helpers out of the family, really hoping that somebody was going to be able to help me out. And I mentioned the project to all four of our kids. I don't believe Grace was really involved, so it was really directed more at my three boys at the time. But the long and the short of it was on that faithful Saturday morning, all three of them found other things to do and made themselves unavailable to help me out. And so, well, it would have been really nice to have their help. So the project needed to get done. And what the project entailed was I had two big old spruce trees at my office that had died. And we were watching these things die several years, and they were getting to the point where they were getting ready to fall over in the next couple of years. So I figured it'd be best if I got up there early in the morning and cut them down and just remove them myself. So it would have been nice to have them help me with that project, but it had to be done, so I did it myself. And I think part of it was they just didn't want to get up early. And I wanted to get it done early because where these trees fell, I had to actually drop them into my parking lot. And so I wanted to do it before there were any cars driving through. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, I was cutting these trees down. I was looking at them and I was like, wow, these trees were planted on an interesting angle. That angle actually follows my property line. So they were actually planted there as a border, a marker of where the property border was. And I remembered that there used to be another clump of trees further down the line that we took down several years before that. And I was like, oh, wow, whoever owned this property originally probably planted these trees, and they did this all along the back border of the property to mark where their property line was. And that was a common thing that used to be done, was that people, instead of putting up fences, oftentimes would put shrubbery or trees along their property border. It's still done today. And but these trees we still have some there now to this very day, and they're very tall, and they're healthy to this day. And so I was like, well, why did these two out of all these healthy trees die? And I realized that they were the ones that were closest to the parking lot. And during the wintertime, when the snow got really bad, oftentimes I would plow the snow and pile it up against those trees. And a busy parking lot has snow that gets filled with rock salt. And that salt that melts the ice on the road gets into the root systems of these trees, and it's not really good for them. So I believe that was probably the demise of those trees. It was probably from plowing snow up against them. So long story short, the lesson would be obviously to not plow snow up against trees like that because you could kill them. But that's not the whole purpose of this blog. That's the easiest lesson. This podcast would be over right now, and you guys could all go do something else. But instead, I've got 5 takeaways from you, and so let's get to it. That's the story. That's the backstory. Let's get to the 5 takeaways. The first one is that trees were planted with a purpose, and the planter of the tree knows the purpose. The tree just has to grow into its purpose. So that's the sole job of the tree, is to really just grow and become the best version of itself that it can. And all of us have a purpose as well. And our purpose is to grow into what our job is to grow into what our Creator has made us to do. And the hardest part for all of us, I think, is to get a handle on that. In other words, I think oftentimes really think too deeply and don't think about what we're really good at, what we are gifted in. God made us all very differently, and that's wonderful. And those gifts that we were blessed with are part of what's making our purpose. So, or helping us to define where we play in our role as far as our purpose goes. So, but your version is to find out what the best version of that is. So in the case of a tree is going to grow as high as it possibly can. So we have to do the same thing. We have to reach as high as we possibly can. And we'll drive its roots down as far as it could possibly go. And the same with us. We have to drive our roots down deep as well. All of those things can help us to become the best version of ourselves and ultimately to discover our purpose through the growing process. So in order to grow, you have to take chances. You have to reach for the sky. And I believe that's point number 1, is that you were made for a purpose, just like a tree. And point number 2 is your health is critical. Your health is critical to carry out your purpose. So again, it's really difficult for people to even sometimes figure out what their purpose is, but you certainly are going to have a much more difficult time in whatever you're doing if you're not healthy. And your health is an absolute, I think, one of the most important things for us to really consider with whatever we're doing. If you lose your health, your level of effectiveness goes downhill tremendously. Your level of focus, your level of energy, it all becomes compromised as you lose your health. And with that goes effectiveness in delivering and seeking out and achieving your true purpose in life. So, and the absolute opposite can happen too when we lose our health, is that you're no longer becoming productive and delivering on your purpose, but now you can actually become the burden, right? Which is now you're a strain on the system, you're a strain on possibly family members, but ultimately now instead of delivering more than you're consuming, now you're consuming more than you're delivering. And that's not good for sustaining life, right? So that's point number 2, your health is critical. Point number 3 is what we take in needs to be pure. So in the case of any type of a plant, right, as soon as you start to put toxic things into the soil, what happens to the plant? Well, it's not good for it, right? We know that. So we know that a plant, a tree, whatever it might be, it needs adequate amounts of water, nutrients, and sunlight in order for it to express its genetic potential. And the same thing goes for us. The clarity or the purity of our intake, what we take in through our diet, through our ears, through our eyes, our thoughts, all of these things that we bring into ourselves. What are you feeding yourself? Not just feeding yourself physically with what's going in your mouth, but also what are you feeding your brain? Is it building you up to be a better version of yourself, or is it toxic? Is it polluting you to the point that it's taking away or distracting or compromising what your genetic potential really is? So I think that is something that everybody needs to really hone in on. It's a simple concept, but you got to keep the fundamentals at the front of your mind at all times. So that's point number 3. Point number 4 is deep roots, right? A tree with deep roots is going to be stable in strong winds, right? And it's also going to be able to handle a drought or a dry season much better. And I think the same thing goes for us as human beings, is that the deeper our roots go, it's easier for us to withstand a storm, right? So I know that my family has been there for me. I'm very blessed to have deep roots in a family, and that has been fantastic. But it's not just my biological family, but my network of friends, my network of colleagues. They have all contributed to the stability of my life. And I can't tell you how valuable that deeply rooted community of people that can support you and sustain you in the times of a storm or even in your dry seasons in life. Because we all can have those seasons. More than likely, you're going to have several if you're going to live a long life. So that's a critical ingredient to becoming the best version of yourself, for sure. And here's another one that's pretty interesting, is point number 5, and this goes back to, it was very easy for me to pick out these 2 dead trees among this lineup of trees. Say there were 15 trees there, and you could see the 2 dead spruce trees very clearly because they didn't look good, right? Their bark was falling off. They didn't have as many pine needles. They were all brown, and there were no pine cones. So the really dull colored, bare looking trees were obviously the sick ones, right? So that's clear. So appearance matters is really what point number 5 is that they say that, you can't judge a book by its cover, but the reality is you can tell a lot by appearance. Appearance is something that people take a look at. I hate to say it, but people get judged by appearance. And the reality is sometimes it's kind of accurate. You can see some sick, you can see people that are sick. You can see that they're not necessarily expressing the best health, much like a tree you can pick out of a crowd, right? If you see somebody that's on a ventilator versus somebody that's not, that's pretty clear, right? Not to, make light of somebody that's on a ventilator, but say somebody that has emphysema that's on oxygen, same thing. So appearance does matter, but at the same time, like how healthy do you look, right? Is that something that's easily picked out in a crowd? Do people often compliment you based on how vibrant and healthy you look? And there's nothing like that as far as a compliment. It does a lot for our own well-being when somebody compliments us based on our appearance. So spend time on taking care of your own appearance. Spend time on investing in your own appearance, because it is worth it and you are worth it. Oftentimes people will neglect those things because they lose their own self-image and their own self-worth, which is a whole other point in and of itself. But there are 5 helpful points that hopefully remind you of some things that you probably already know and already knew. But I still remember when my kids ditched me on that faithful Saturday morning, and they found other things that they had to do. Anyway, so that's all I have for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. I want to thank you all for joining me. And again, tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we'll see you next week.